Hey folks, what is up? It is Mike Vanderpool, and this is the Make It Happen podcast. This is where I talk to cool people doing cool things. Today, I had the pleasure of speaking with Linda Amici, an instructional design coach over at Westerville City Schools in Central Ohio. Linda is an amazing instructional designer, and as somebody like myself who is very much interested in how we better educate kids, how we keep instructors involved and motivated to do their best work, this conversation is just so important. I encourage anybody and everybody who's interested in how we best connect with kids to help turn them into creative problem solvers. This is the conversation you want to listen to. Linda is amazing, folks. Glad to have you here. Let's make it happen. I stumbled on you somehow, some way on LinkedIn, been connecting with some really cool people there. I love talking to instructional designers because I'm actually working on a whole bunch of instructional designy stuff right now. So I love having the opportunity to bounce ideas off of people. You seem like somebody who is pretty cool, and I'm just excited here to hang out with Linda Amici. Okay. Can I say it with an accent? Is that even cooler?
That's great. Even cooler.
Awesome. So Linda, tell me a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind, for us to get started.
Sure. Yeah. So I coach in Westerville City Schools. I support teachers in all 5 of our middle schools to create instructional design and collaborate on different things that would really align our learners to help prepare them for the workforce that is ahead, and that align with our educational framework, our portrait of a graduate competencies, and our educational priorities from our district. So really a lot of exploration in terms of crossover between what industry is doing and what some of our really high performing, high innovative technology spaces, the people that are working there, what they're doing, and then what is happening in our school district.
And what age groups are you working with?
6th, 7th, and 8th, so middle school.
Oh, that's the sweet spot, I think.
It is. I agree.
That is, people ask me all the time about education and, hey, where should we best try to connect with kids? And I don't know if I say that age group from 5th to 8th grade, they're not yet sorted into what bucket they think they should be in, and they've still got ideas and dreams and want to make cool stuff happen. So that's an awesome spot to be in.
Really
So how did you become an instructional designer?
Well, I have been in the classroom for a while, interspersed between that and then leading in leadership positions of schools, and ended up just feeling like I needed to change, and ended up applying for this position as instructional coach in middle schools, and just absolutely have loved it. So I do a lot of crossover kind of thinking and practice from different industries. I don't just stick with education. I feel like we can learn a lot from all different ways of being.
I knew talking to you was going to be worth it. This is freaking phenomenal. So, because one of the things that we're working on here over in the Northwest Ohio region, specifically Toledo and a little bit into the cornfields, is more awareness of opportunity for kids. I became an instructional designer not even knowing it was a thing. It was a very fortunate kind of set of conversations that led me down this path. The first podcast guest that I had, Valerie Thompson, she is a graphic designer, and she stumbled into her thing. So while stumbling into things is awesome, I don't know that that's the best way for us to be able to teach kids, make kids aware of what opportunities are out there and get them inspired to be things. So very, very cool. When you were a teacher, what was your experience like teaching, and what did you teach?
Yeah, I didn't ever think I wanted to be a teacher. My dad was a guidance counselor. He became one when I was in 5th grade, and really annually gave me a career placement test where I annually told him I wanted to study the whales or be a sociologist or research, all kinds of different things. And annually he'd say, you should really think about being a teacher. And I was like, no way. Because for me, school wasn't super relevant. There was a lot of time where I felt like I was at school just sort of using my imagination in a way because the stuff I didn't see how it could be in any way, shape, or form relevant to me. So when given the opportunity to become a teacher, I was like, I would never want to put anybody else through that. And then ended up at Ohio State University. My 3rd year, a friend of mine was applying for a program that was rather unique. And she was like, you should interview for this program. It would be really good. And I was like, I'm not being a teacher. And she's like, just interview for it. And I did. And I ended up, it was a program that was very different. And it basically, once I got in, they took us away to like a retreat where we unlearned how we thought learning really was. And then it was a really intentional process to teach us how learning actually happens in a more neuroscientific way, and to help us to experience that. And so then coming back, going into the classroom, I taught in schools that were very informal and very like project-based, problem-based are the words today we'd use. And then from there, then ended up having some children, and then going back into more, I went into a couple leadership positions, and then ended up back in the classroom, but in a more traditional environment. And so in that case, then I just leaned into all of my project-based, problem-based community, and did sort of a different kind of approach. And so as a teacher, I taught a lot of fifth graders, and they were amazing, and really watched them to become creative problem solvers and design thinkers and agile thinkers. That inspired me to really want to support other teachers to be able to offer those learning experiences.
So you're definitely more connected into the K-8 space than I am. I teach college, but like I've got a seventh grader, I've got a second grader, and I've got some friends who are teaching in that space. Are elementary school teachers being taught instructional design in any way, shape, or form outside of like what you're doing? Like when they come in, what instructional design experience do they have?
I think it depends on where they go to school for their higher ed experience. I know I do some work adjuncting at Otterbein University, and they do a great job in their education department of helping their young people, their pre-service teachers, to explore and implement a lot of different project-based kind of approaches. In fact, I was part of an out-of-the-gate grant that partnered PBL Works, national faculty, with university faculty, cooperating teachers, and then student teachers to collaboratively design and implement projects that would be multidisciplinary and that would be connected clearly to real life authentic experiences. And so having had that opportunity to do with several student teachers really inspired me to realize there's so much more we can do as educators to really bring learning alive for our young people.
Yeah,
I don't know if I answered your question.
I don't know. I got too many questions right now. You've got my brain flying all over the place, right? You mentioned Agile, you mentioned design thinking. Those are all things that we're trying to employ in a lot of the stuff that we're doing. We're also trying to help teachers better understand how to make some of these things happen. I had a conversation with a faculty who was trying an active learning environment. And they were like, oh my goodness, this is so much work. This is so difficult. How have you, I guess, what challenges and what successes or remedies to those challenges have you found in your work?
Yeah. The challenges, I think a lot of the big challenges we have today in education relate to a lack of agency for the young people, the lack of ownership of learning. It's, our education system was designed hundreds of years ago to create compliant learners. And today, that's not what the industry, what the world is needing. We need creative problem solvers who can be empathetic to actual challenges that we face today and be able to design for change and for positive impact in the world. And so some of the challenges that I've faced, I think probably the biggest is mindset shift. We have a lot of pressure as our society and, colleagues, all different. This system is so pressurized that, is putting pressure on teachers to be the knowers of all knowledge. Well, now with the, duplication of collective knowledge being so rapid, the pace at which knowledge is duplicated, we really can't even be the knowers of all knowledge, even in the content areas that we quote teach, right? And so the shift in mindset to be more of designers of learning experiences rather than knowers of all knowledge. It's hard when there's so much pressure between society saying teachers should know it all and do, this is the way my experience was as a student. So therefore, that would be what I would expect for my own children, right? It's very different. It's a different mindset shift to actually inspire our young people and to believe in their brilliance and to learn with and from them as they make the connections. She who does the work does the learning kind of concept, so inspiring them to think differently and to be the active problem solvers that the world needs, I think it requires the shift of the educator to step down from the, sage on the stage role, which is, when our administrators come in to observe us, a lot of times, the managed classroom. I think in education, we're very siloed. And so I think we tend to, we get into our spaces and we know what we need to do, and we need to help these kids to understand this content. And we know how we've done it before, and we're going to just keep doing the same thing the same way. And if we get the test scores that we want, then that's good enough. And that's really not good enough. So I think it does take a mindset shift. So the way we've approached it has been to gather the willing, teachers that are like, for one reason or another, either they're high achieving teachers that want to try something new, that are excited to learn and explore and continue lifelong learning, or teachers that are like, I feel like I'm ready to retire. This is not working. I don't like this. I'm at an impasse here. For whatever reason, teachers that are willing to try something new, we have them walk through the design ingenuity agile experience as a learner and have them make that mindset shift, because it is really it's a mindset shift. Like, it transforms the way you think. Like, as much as project-based learning, when I learned how to do that, I began to think in driving questions, and that has not stopped. It has changed my neural pathways, right? I no longer see a challenge or a problem and say, oh, wow, that's awful. In my mind, I'm like, how can I, as an educator, help, remedy this by this or this, right? I think differently because of those experiences. And so in the same way, the idea that when we experience something, we're far more apt to have the psychological safety to try it in a novel situation, right? That's one of the things that is really critical. The second thing is hard jobs are always easier with a friend, so coming alongside and working
I
together.
think that's misery loves company. I think that's what
a synonym for that adage. But like having teachers connect together and learn from and with one another as they're designing their learning experiences for the young people, that's been really impactful. And having them to have a coach that's not evaluative, that's there just to support, that's there to realize that they bring brilliance to this framework that's all their own. We've had all these different teachers experiment with this, and they've done magnificent things with these young people. It's been remarkable, but it's because they bring their expertise to it. And, so then honoring that expertise and realizing, that we all need agency. Agency reduces stress. Agency, when we have ownership of what we're doing, it really does supercharge everything. And so as they gain agency, then they're more apt to help their young people to gain agency and to be the leaders of their learning as they're making those connections. And then they're teaching their peers their connections that they've made. So I think those are some really important things. We also have discovered kind of the hard way that there are some precursors, some foundational routines that really are necessary to supercharge this Agile in the classroom design ingenuity framework. And one of them is relationships. One of them is routines. And I don't mean routines like put your book bag here, but routines like we deeply listen to one another. We learn from and with one another. We look for surprises. We look for the learning. We're seeking out something that surprises us because we know that's when we're actually learning. And then real learning, real life, real world learning can happen when we can get those things down. When you've got that sense of psychological safety, who you're working with, the educator, it cares about you and believes in your unlimited potential, and that your work is really important and necessary and vital. Then we have an environment that's conducive, right? We have to get the environment right. And then we offer these opportunities for young people to make these powerful connections. And going with, I don't know if you know Angus Fletcher, he'd be a great one for your podcast, but looking at
I've got a list. You're giving me homework.
Yeah, Angus Fletcher is double degree neuroscience and literature. He's at the Ohio State University, and he's the only story scientist in the world. And he has really hacked into how we can solve problems and overcome challenges using the power of narrative story. And so that is very much incorporated into the work that we're doing with these young people in the middle schools, is helping them to get really good at storytelling and sharing their discoveries with their peers and others. We invite lots of people in for the celebrations of learning, other adults, other community members, to really learn from and with these young people about their discoveries as they've tried to connect what they care about with what they need to learn.
I love the learn from these kids. I have been at too many tables where we're talking about making decisions for young people, and there's not a young person in the room. It's such as a design thinker, it's such a frustrating experience. I'm like, we're supposed to have the users here.
Yes, exactly. Closing that user, really getting that, user-centered design is really important.
I just kind of had this realization as listening to you, and when we talk about instructional design, too often, as somebody who has a degree in whatever it is, in Masters of Education in Learning Design and Technology, basically a long way to say instructional designer. So much of what I see when it comes to instructional design jobs, and again, my view is not the end all be all, but it's been kind of hyper specific. I was looking for work for a few years in this space, was very much like tool dependent. It seemed like it was more on being able to use Articulate or some of the other, SCORM development packages or LMS administration, and not so much the relationship part of supporting teachers who are maybe not designing, but probably designing in some way, shape, or form and delivering these learning experiences. So that's pretty fascinating. Like, your title as an instructional design coach really now makes better sense to me. At first I was like, what does that even mean? It felt like two separate things, but now I better understand. So you are the supportive assistant coach, because I think what will happen sometimes is, and I've seen this where, hey, faculty, here's a little bit of training that we're going to do to start this semester. And wouldn't it be great if you employed an active classroom? Wouldn't it be great if you had a flipped classroom? Wouldn't you try this or try this new end all be all silver bullet that education is looking for? And then you dump them back into the traditional semester, traditional environment where they've got the same paperwork and assessment and everything else to fill out. And all of that good stuff just gets pushed to the side because you're now running the race. It becomes stressful. You fall back into the previous routine. So this idea of having somebody on the side to help with that is pretty freaking phenomenal. And I think probably why you've had the success that you've had. I don't see it working any other way. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And again, this is just me kind of having this realization of what you actually do.
Yeah. And to gain clarity on that, that was my first, I've been in this role for 2.5 years, and my official title is instructional coach. And so the design part is all me. I just added that one in.
Okay, awesome. But that's like,
because it makes sense. Like, I'm helping support learning experience, designing of learning experiences that matter, that will help shape the way our young people, the potential that they have, help them to become more curious, creative problem solvers, and help shift their trajectory potential. If you think about it, right? The more curious they get, the more curious we cultivate their curiosity, the more curious they are, the more potential they have to learn really anything, not just what they need to learn right now in this class. But, when you begin to think in a more curious way, you become more curious. It creates more neural pathways, and it just, it's that virtuous cycle, right? We have a lot of vicious cycles in our world, but if we can get that balancing loop to get the virtuous cycle where we have learners that are now agentic in their learning, and they realize that the big goal is that they can now connect what they care about with anything anybody ever asks them to learn. Because when I start with teachers, I say, what is your hatred standard? I coined that for my daughter, who was like,
what is that hatred standard? That sounds awesome.
The standard that you're like, oh my gosh, I teach this, and then I'm like, the kids are like, oh, that was great. Now let's move on. Like, what was that, right? The standard that doesn't vitalize, the standard that you just don't see the point. If we start there
Mm.
and get clarity on why is that important? Why is it important to you first, educator? And then from there, then why, let's challenge students to figure out, why is this important? How does this connect with our real life and our real interests and our real curiosities, and this bigger overarching understanding that we need you to get. We need you to understand this bigger picture concept. How does that connect with your life? And then how does that connect with what you need to learn about? If we can do that, then we've supercharged them to be able to learn anything, and at a mastery learning point. So we've seen depth of knowledge levels of 3 and 4 over the course of 2 weeks. And that doesn't, I've been involved in a lot of different pedagogical, approaches, and I've never seen anything that has the potential that this work has, and is developing more and more every day, because it is agile. It's developing. It's not like it's done. It's
Mhm.
constantly being, different iterations and different contexts and different, adaptations that, keeping the user in mind, keeping that young person and the goal of having them learn to become collaborative and communicative and adaptable, and all of our portrait of graduate competencies. If we have that as our goal in mind, we can incorporate all these things, so we can give them a target that requires them to learn the standards in order to achieve the target that they now care about.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it was a Forbes magazine article that came out a couple months ago talking about, and I've had this backed up by some people in industry, that graduates, they don't communicate well. They don't have any agency. You have to manage them one-to-one. It sounds like what you're doing solves a little bit of that more professional skills side of the problem as well.
Mhm. For sure. We've seen young people just completely do things that astound us over and over and over and over again. Share stories that they've connected that I'll never forget. We've had
And
the
that's got to be
first.
something that inspires you to get through the dumbness of some of what we're forced to do. I'm going to be as honest as possible, right? There's some things that in education that I think we're always going to have to do, even if we don't agree with them. But
Those
seeing
darn
those,
dailies of the system, right?
yeah, but seeing a learner seeing a learner work through a problem that they don't think that they themselves might be able to achieve, but actually to be able to achieve it, and then have some demonstrable pride
Mhm.
and willingness to tell about that achievement, that's the biggest freaking win you can ever get, I think, inside of an educational environment. I don't know what else would be better.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And we've had teachers that have gone through this process that have, after shifting their practice, been like, I was ready to retire. Like, I was getting out of this profession.
Hmm.
And, that's why they were so interested in learning something new, because they were like, oh my gosh, like what's happening it's not doing it for me anymore. These students are different. The experience is different, and this is not where I want to be. And now, be like, I look forward to coming to school every day. I look forward to this because it's vitalizing.
Well,
Vital-
it's I mean, why do we become teachers, right? We become teachers because we think we can make a difference in the lives of other people. And if for a decade or so you aren't able to see that, even if maybe you do have it happen, but it's not always visible. You don't always get the letter thanking you 20 years later, right? Even
Yeah.
though you probably had a bigger impact than you really think.
Yeah.
Helping them to have experiences where they're revitalized and able to see that. I mean, are you writing the book on this right now, or are you documenting this well? Because if not, you
Working
should. Well, okay, awesome. That's great, because that's the one that this is the one thing I've seen within some of the instructional design literature. It's written for the academy, and it's not always necessarily written in a way that it's easy to translate or transfer into other learning environments. So like to be able to have like a recipe, and again, I know we talk about design thinking and agile, and it's like not always as prescriptive,
Yeah.
but I think what is really, really cool about the design thinking methodology and some of these other things, it allows us a framework to work within. It's not necessarily prescriptive about all of the daily things that we do, but it gives us this almost safety net around doing projects that allows us to incorporate failure and be acceptable to failure. If something might not work, but we had this idea, it didn't work, we might hopefully have some idea from the data of why it didn't work. And again, the biggest part, what do we do differently next time, right? That conversation I have found within educational spaces where we are time boxed. We may not have the opportunity to do something 2, 3, even twice within a semester, but just having the conversation about what you might do differently if you were to do it again, or how you might transfer into a different situation, is almost as valuable as the doing of the thing again.
100%. And I think that's one thing that's really missing in education is we've got teachers that a lot of them are subbing for they're covering for other teachers because we've got a crisis here on our hands of substitute guest teachers. And so we don't take the time to reflect and say, all right, now what went well, what didn't go well. And I think that's another really great, just a really good opportunity I can offer as a coach coming alongside them. And we always go through, what is it that went well? What would you do differently next time? What do you plan? And so we have that reflective time and we put that in writing and we, have that somewhere where they can reflect before they, go through their next one. And it's just a constantly iterating. And then connecting them with other educators that are like, hey, I learned this, I learned not to do this, and I learned, this. And then that teacher will try something similar and then report back and be like, hey, this worked, and I tried this new thing and this was great. And so then another teacher's like, ooh, I want to try that new thing. And so then the next teacher will try the thing that they learned from a colleague. And so it really does create a connected community of learning, and a professional, cohort of professionals that are connected to one another. And that feels much better than the siloed approach that we've been having traditionally in education.
I mean, and the silos exist because we build silos. That's like, I could rant about those.
Yeah.
But so having this community of practice of teachers who are sharing, at the end of the day, I think that's what the ultimate goal is, right? Like, as a species who has evolved, or whatever, however you want to say it, for 6,000 to 6 million, whatever years it's been, like, we've survived as a species because of our willingness to share information and learn with each other. How do you make that happen?
I think part of it is showing up as an authentic, curious learner. I am not a knower of all knowledge, nor am I like the most expert teacher ever. I'm a coach because I have a passion for helping support educators to support young people to be their best selves. And so I know that I'm constantly learning, and I'm learning from and with those teachers, and I'm honoring their expertise all along the way. And so I've built a lot of trust with them. They realize I'm not there to evaluate. I'm not there to judge. I'm there to walk to the edge with them and to try out something new, and then to reflect on how that worked, and to take what worked and, then develop that even further, and to take what didn't and, put that to the side and hospice that out,
So, okay. Can we role play?
Yeah, sure.
So, I am a teacher who just got out of a semester in a new situation. It's only slightly role play. Some of this is actually real. And I'm dealing with a new type of student who I haven't dealt with before, specifically student athletes. And it's been a challenge because I don't understand, and I don't know how to necessarily motivate them. Traditionally, luckily, I teach graphic design and design, which is a doing of things type thing, which should be more exciting than maybe, no offense, comp one, English comp faculty.
Relevant, yeah.
Yeah. But I've noticed, like, even though I'm a sports person, I can talk sports. I showed up at some of their games just to kind of have some visibility. Like, I still am not feeling like I'm connecting very well or getting the best work out of them. Like, how would you start with me?
I would 100% start with curiosity. What is it? I would encourage you to ask them, what is it that you're curious about? What do you care about? What would you, if you had to come to my class every day for the rest of the year and you had to learn something, but, it could be anything. What would you want to learn about? What would you, and then what about that would you want to learn about? And genuinely, I think the more I show up as an engaged listener, and they can suss that out so easily, they know if you're really listening or if you're just hearing, right? And so much of their growing up experience and so much of the world that's happening around us today is hearing. We're consuming information, but we're not really actively engaged in it. So I had a young man. We do this like deep listening activity where I model and then they partner pair with one another. And I asked, what is it that you're curious about? And he said a few things and he's like, advocacy. I want to advocate for people that don't have a voice. And I was like, wow, tell me more. Like what inspired that? What caused you to get interested in that in the first place? And I asked him a few questions and then I thanked him. And then I had asked the rest of the students to like, you guys are now researchers, pay attention to what I'm doing and not doing, what I'm saying and not saying, because I'm going to ask you, what you noticed. And then I, asked them, what is it that you noticed? And they were like, well, that you were really listening. I'm like, how'd you know? And they're like, well, you looked at him, you were nodding, you were asking questions. I'm like, was I just asking any questions? And they're like, no, you're asking questions based on the answers that he gave. And about 2 weeks later, I ended up back in that class supporting that teacher, and we were doing a workshop model, small groups. And one of the things in the small group, we were working again on active listening in my small group, and I had these cards that it's the big table cards. I don't know if you've seen those. They're the Columbus Foundation does this big table thing. That would be a fun thing for you to investigate at some point. But these cards were asking questions. And one of the questions was, when was the last time you felt deeply listened to and how did that feel? And the young man was like, he thought for a second and he goes, well, it was the last time you came into class when you asked me about being an advocate. And I was like, oh, like that was like, wow, that was a couple of weeks ago though, like we aren't practiced at deeply listening to one another. And one of the things that I always lead with when I introduce this, to build this foundation of learning from and with one another is the story of, like if you think of each person as having $1 billion diamond within them, there's something brilliant within them that will spark something in you that's unique and different. How curious would you show up then? And so, we do this little like kind of a metaphoric thing, but then thinking about where are you surprised when how can you look for surprises, seek surprises, and be curious enough until you find out something that surprises you. Celeste Headley has a TED Talk, and the TED Talk that she has really was inspiring. There's always something to be surprised about. There's always something within each person that you learn that will shift who you are and how you think and how you show up. And so then we encourage them to use that as a challenge. And I've had kids be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea I could do that. Like I can ask questions that can draw out. I'm so excited. I'm going to try this on my siblings at home. Like they get so excited when they realize that they have the power to be curious about people around them. And not only does it vitalize them because they're agentic in their discovery, but it also vitalizes the person who, has attention and has somebody curious about them. So it's just really a superpower. It is one of our superpowers that I think we don't develop intentionally in school. That should be one of our big rocks, right?
Yeah. So, man, oh man, like I'm realizing now all the things I did wrong this past semester.
Mm-hmm. They're all the learnings. Maybe all the learnings.
But that's what's great, I think, about being a teacher is you get a do-over. Like every semester, every year, you kind of get this do-over. And how do we, and I'm going to make a general assumption here, though, how do we get teachers to feel so we have a month off or 2 weeks or a month off at Christmas, 3 months off over the summer, right? Mm-hmm. How do we get teachers to feel energized at the end of the semester, looking forward to what's coming next versus just, oh my goodness, thankfully I can be at the pool for 3 months. Like how do we inspire teachers with what you're doing?
Yeah. I think it's not as hard as we might think. It's helping them to realize the potential power that they have to shift the trajectory of lives. I have teachers that text me all the weekends and different things. They're so, how about this? Can we do this? Let's try this, whatever. And I think it's why we got into teaching. It's vitalizing, because when you take the pressure off and you realize you don't have to know all the things, but you have to become an expert in your learners, what they're curious about,
Mhm.
and ways to help them, to drop the breadcrumbs so that they can make the connections to new meaning, to build, making meaning from seemingly disparate kind of concepts. When you can do that, you can learn so much. It it makes you, because we're lifelong learners, because we're hardwired to learn, when we're showing up in a way that is a learning kind of way, I think it really just is vitalizing. And so then you want more of the vitality, right? It's why we eat
Mhm.
chocolate, right? It's great and we love it. We want to eat more, right? So I think the key is, our system is very much needing an overhaul, right? Because
I mean,
the
go and watch Sir Ken Robinson's "Do Schools Kill Creativity" TED Talk
yes.
from 20 years ago, and shake your head as like they were screaming this decades ago,
My
people.
gosh, I know that is really frustrating when you find a
Yeah.
video and you're like, oh my gosh, that's so true now. I wonder, this is great that this just came out. And then you look and you're like, oh, it came out 10 years ago and we're still doing things the same,
Well,
the same way.
and I think that there's pockets, right? There's like your school districts are different, and some that are in different financial and other demographic situations are able to do things that others aren't. I mean, I'm very fortunate. Our school has an occupational therapist, which helps deal with some of what my
Mhm.
son deals with from that perspective. It sounds like the
Mhm.
school district you're in can afford to have an instructional coach, instructional designer. Not every school district can do that, right? So how do we take what you're able to do? And the answer may be there, it's not possible, but I don't believe in that for 1 second. I think there's always a way to figure stuff out. How do we take what you've been able to do in this coaching model and help it happen in places that may be underfunded, understaffed,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
underinspired? How do we inspire places where they don't think it's possible?
Mhm. I think one thing is just to show that it is possible, and then help connect
Mhm.
them with grant funding to support. Because much of the Agile work I've brought in, I've written grants to do. My
Are those
role
state or
is
federal? Just out of curiosity.
private grants to
Oh,
promote
okay. Okay.
education.
Awesome.
So my position isn't grant funded. My position is funded by the district, and I'm charged to help support, teachers to do evidence-based, you know, data-informed shifts in their practice. And
Gotcha.
then
Okay.
this is a way that I found that supercharges this. So then I've written 3 grants to get this work happening. Um, so I think just showing that it's possible, and then having people that are willing to come alongside and support that transformation, because it is that whole tipping point theory. You get a few people doing that, and then they're like, oh my gosh, this has changed, and they show up differently. And even if they're not promoting it actively like that, you can tell there's been a shift in
Mhm.
them. You could tell there's been a change, and then, helping cultivate and nurture that. I would I would love to go back to your question though about your young athletes and
Yeah, because I thought I was doing good stuff, and I switched some of the assignments to be about sports things because oh, you're an athlete, let's do sports stuff. But then I probably wasn't connecting with them uh, in the way I thought I was.
well, I mean, I guess I wonder too, I wonder how, I don't know how you show up as an educator, but I found it to be a high leverage point to show up really real and be like, hey, you guys, I'm charged to teach you, to help you understand these things. And I know that you're interested in these things. And I don't know how to do this. Like, I don't know how to put this together. So I wonder um, if we could do a little bit of exploration together to figure out, how does what you're curious about connect with what we need to learn here? How can those things, I don't know what it is, but I know that you're brilliant and you can figure this out. So I'm, maybe an assignment of like, what's the connection between these things for you? What's a connection between software development, what they're curious about, and something else random, right? Maybe it's a competency that would be important in the field. Like, that is the essence of the design ingenuity framework. And so I'm wondering if challenging them to do it, that gives them the agency, and then they share the connections they make with one another, which puts you in the position of a learner also, you know what I mean? Because we're learning from and with. And the way we do this isn't like one student is in front of 100 students. We've figured out that there are ways to do like an in and out circle. I don't know if you've done that, where like one person is sharing to like say 3 people, and then they rotate. So they get to share their idea or their concept at least 3 times. Getting
Okay.
feedback in between, so that then the feedback that they get shifts the way they share it the next time, because they're like,
Mhm.
oh, that person asked me about this and this, I should include that when I share it the next time. So there's that quick iterative cycle of sharing, even with the feedback protocol in between. And then everybody gets a chance to share and everybody gets a chance to be curious. But so the first step is to, help them to grow their curiosity and cultivate that curiosity. So then when they do show up, they're not just sitting and listening like as a hearer, they're listening as an
Mhm.
active listener, so they can ask good questions and learn more, because they're chasing the surprises. They want to learn something new.
Yeah, curiosity plus challenges equals development.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Let me say
Man, oh man, I have to rewrite all of my syllabus now.
that.
Syllabi.
No.
Well, so it's just interesting because we started off the conversation talking. You're doing 6th through 8th grade, and I'd argue that's the sweet spot, right?
Mhm.
But we're working here with college age folks. We're working with. I'm working kind of coaching somebody who wants to get into tech as a 55-year-old
Mm.
that doesn't have a huge background in tech, right?
Yeah.
So, like these things that what you're doing in the sweet spot, do you see any way we could transfer those into like older learners,
Oh,
older?
there's always a way. Yes, because that's what we do with the educators.
Oh, yeah. Okay, great. Yes.
I mean, we do that same thing. And I think to really set up the anticipation set, lean into that discomfort place, because we're so comfortable when we know what we're doing. But you won't know what you're doing right now. And that is to be expected. That's exactly where you need to be, is in a place of grappling. And we always tell them, go to give yourself time to reflect, give yourself time to take a shower, walk, and without all of the stimuli, just to really intentionally try to figure out the connections. That requires not being distracted all the time. That requires time
Mhm.
for your brain to do what your brain does best, make
Our brain
connections.
will do amazing things if we stop dumping crap into it.
Yes, we have so much overload.
Yeah.
It's like we have just too much of everything. I love cross-cultural travel, and I live in lots of different places. And, there's so many things that different cultures have that we don't, that, like that time for reflection, that time for connection, that intentionality of things that,
Mm.
so I think, yes, adults can for sure do that. It's been transformative and really remarkable to watch them do that. And
It
that
takes time though, doesn't it? It takes
for sure.
time to do this well. How do we in this society where fast food, give me everything, give me the answer now,
Mhm.
how do we do this?
I think we have to build curiosity, you know?
So
Do
what
we
is that? How do we do that though? What do you mean? Like,
well,
connecting with people with what they're curious about initially, right? As kind of like a sparking
mhm.
motivator.
But I mean, curiosity in terms of like, what can we do differently that would enable us to be more successful and more vitalized? I keep saying that same word, I'm sorry, but like, what can we do? What small
Mhm.
shifts can we make that would cause us to be able to not only, you know
So what you're doing really is so design thinking, right? Was in your initial message to me. How much experience do you have with design thinking as a practice,
well, like
as a framework?
I've done some work with the design and engineering classes that we have in our district, teaching them how to, create user-centered design. We did a
Okay.
project where a friend of mine, she runs this like, it's like a positive connection website thing where people come together and they just connect with one another. And it's like, that's just it's her vibe. So she came in and shared with the students in this design and engineering class what she does and how much fun it's been and how great it's been, and kind of the inspiration behind her work. And then we challenged the young people to create something a design that would build a sense of belonging and connection. And then they did some agile work with it. And then they looked, we looked at the design thinking process. And so then they used the design thinking process to create something, and then they shared it. And I mean, the stories were fantastic. Like one kid, he was trying to build a sense of belonging and connection in band. And I was like, oh, tell me more, and he's like, well, yeah, because in band, like, well, the first year it was horrible. Like, I hated it. I was trying to learn this new instrument. I couldn't figure it out. It was just really like almost, torture. And he said, but then when I figured out how to do it, I began to love it. And then when I think about, like, if young people don't get involved in music, then we wouldn't have the musicians that we have now that inspire us. He's like, I love Beyonce. If she didn't get involved in or interested in music when she was young, then we wouldn't have Beyonce's music to inspire us, And so helping them to make the connection between why they're doing what they're doing, they can make those connections, and they're much more profound and impactful when they make them than when we make them for them. When we connect them, like, this is how this connects to, the athletic, whatever you're wanting to do. That's sort of, that's one way to do it. And another way would be to challenge them to do it. How is this connected to you? I don't know. Use reliable resources, like find your credible resources and discover things, search for things that surprise you and figure it out, and then help us understand what you've discovered. So, share that in the form of a story. Another shout out to Angus Fletcher and his story science.
I mean, the storytellers are they own the future, if you ask me.
True.
So the design thinking framework methodology, for those that don't know, it's very similar to the scientific method, right? You've got this hypothesis or this assumption, and then you kind of brainstorm around how you might test it. In order to test it, you do some type of build a prototype that you can get in the hands of users in order to validate whether, the button over here, they click it more faster than if it's over here, as a simple demonstration. And then you're taking that information and then using that to come up with more hypotheses, right? This scientific method is this boulder down a hill more than just a thing that you achieve once. So maybe, and this is all leading into how do we help faculty or anyone who wants to kind of start moving in this direction, right? Because it does feel like there's a lot here.
Yep.
How do we give people who may or may not be resistant to this or want to do it but don't know that they can fit it into their day-to-day, how do we give them a small win? And what if it's just like there's one idea that you've had for something that you want to try inside of a classroom? And how do we set that up as an experiment that gives you the permission, right? Experiments sometimes don't work out, so you've automatically have a permission to fail built into just the name of the thing. We're going to do this experiment here. You have this idea. I know that there's tons of people who have great ideas. How to execute ideas is where sometimes people will stumble faced with the day-to-day of everything that they're required to do. How do we design this experiment where you can try it on a small scale? You're going to have an hypothesis. What if I bring up Snoop Dogg in my literature class, right? How might that actually go? Or, musical artists from the 2000s, whatever it might be. And then how do we quantify that in order for us as academics and people who are used to assessing? How can we assess whether or not that experiment was successful? First, you have to obviously determine what success looks like. But then also right, going back to the Agile part of it, how do we then do a retrospective after the fact? So even if it is a colossal failure of a lecture, you're still learning from it and taking that knowledge and being able to transfer it into the next time you try it. Bite size, right? How do we eat an elephant?
One bite at a time. That's the question of the day. I mean, we need to figure that one out. And I think there are just many components to it. I think getting crystal clear on what it is that success looks like, feels like, sounds like. What is success? My students will understand this concept. Okay, well, how can we measure that? And not just measure like things that are easy to measure. How can we measure this? What other things might be indicators of success? Well, that my students are engaged, that there's joy in the classroom, that they're working on things. I've had kids that have been like, oh gosh, I'm like, how did you do this thing? And they're like, well, we just couldn't we just couldn't put it down. So we like went home and did it. And like, we did this thing, we created this thing. Like, that's success for me. So, it's not the success that, the state says success, test scores. But to me, success is when they love it so much that it doesn't feel like work. I'm also a fitness instructor. I feel that same way about that.
And that was what I, used to half joke to my wife about, was like, if my kids ever come home from school and say they hate learning, I'm going to pull them out of the school. Because at the end of the day, that's all I want. And what we need is people who still just love to learn. That's how we solve the problems that we don't even know exist yet, right?
Exactly.
This desire to continue to learn and try to figure stuff out and not be afraid of what if or.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And it's not that it's like fun and easy. And that's the other piece.
That's, yeah.
It's challenging.
But that's where the reward comes in. The reward comes in from doing something challenging.
And then realizing you could do harder things than you thought you could. But also, I think the feedback systems we have in place are really essential. So, trying something and then asking the students, what surprised you? What delighted you? What do you now wonder? We do learning questions in this protocol, in the framework, trying to figure out what did they learn? How did it bring them joy? And then how did it spark their curiosity and develop their curiosity? So those things we do routinely. And also we found that there's a difference in, the disengaged learners that realize, oh, so what I care about matters here. Like, it just doesn't happen instantaneously, but when they begin to trust you and realize, oh, she's a real deal. She's not just coming into, she's not playing. She's actually knows that I can do this. She thinks I can do this. And she's expecting me to do this thing. And then what she's asking me to do is something that I want to do, because I do want to figure out how this connects to other things. And I do want to be successful in life. We're aligning to what everyone wants, which is to, have a good life, right? What is a good life to them? I mean, that's another thing what does a good life mean to you? What does that look like to you? What is success for you? How can I, instead of being the person who manages the classroom and tells you what to do, how can I come alongside of you and help align with the goals that you want, that we both want for you, which is you to live to your potential, right? And then what we've discovered is that the kids that were previously disengaged become more engaged. The ones that know how to do school and know how to, memorize the material, regurgitate it on the test. And
expert box checkers is what we called them.
Yeah, those students aren't real happy with it at the beginning, because they're like, wait, no, what do we do? Like, no, just tell us tell us what to do. And we're like, you know what? You got to make the connections. Nobody else can make that for you. You're the only one that knows how, gymnastics, the glacial landforms and this concept connect together. And if you're not, investing in figuring it out, then we all lose out, because we're a community here. We're a community of learners. We need your story. Your story matters. You matter. Then helping them to understand that they matter and what they do matters here. And it's not just for a grade or for a teacher or for, we're not doing this just to get into college. We're doing this because it matters, because we are contagious. Shout out to Vanessa Van Adams. We are contagious. We inspire other people. And if you can share something that can shift somebody's thinking, that's what they all want to do, is be influencers, right? That is capitalizing on their developmental desire, which is to influence. They're influencing one another. They're all so much. But what are they influencing for? How can we leverage that gift, that skill, that desire, and help them to influence one another to be learners and thinkers and problem solvers and innovators and curious learners? How can we, that is our job. That, in my opinion, that is success. That is our real job. And that is not always easily measurable. But then also, I think a component too is helping the teachers to be able to measure what matters too. Like if we can figure out an easy way for teachers to measure engagement levels of their learners, then, and maybe, partner with them to I'm always like, hey, you want me to come in and help you? They're like, come measure my engagement, so I'm always partnering with them in those ways. But if we can give them a tangible way to measure the drivers of success of learning, then we've given them the gift of, they're self-empowered, right? They're empowered to be
efficacy, right?
Right. Yeah. Hattie would tell us that's a good thing, right?
So that was probably the most phenomenal bit of educational passion I've seen in a long time.
Oh.
That last answer, that was awesome. So I know you and I could probably talk forever, but we're at an hour 15. I think it's probably a decent time for us to wrap it up. I would love to do this again, especially after I read all of the books and people that you mentioned. But there's one thing that I've employed lately in all of the things that I do, and you brought it up here at the end, like capping the day, capping the class experience, capping the podcast. What did we learn? Right? Like stopping and just at the end of all of it, okay, we did all of this stuff. Great. We had this hour and 15-minute conversation. Great. At the end of the day, what did we learn?
Yeah. What surprised you about everything I've said or anything I've said?
Goodness. I think like what surprised me is how little I actually know. Like there's so much in this space of, you mentioned the cognition, the part of how our brain works, right? The neuroscience, that is a huge piece of this puzzle. And it explains so much of how people behave and how they approach life as learners. What I learned though here was, I think that the approach that I'm taking of how I present myself inside of the classroom as a fellow learner, I'll tell my students, they call me teacher. I'm like, I'm not here to teach you anything. I'm a fellow learner. I think that's the right approach. I'm just not sure it's manifesting in the way that I need to manifest. So I've learned that I need to do some kind of reflection and digging into some of what you're doing to really, really, truly embody the phrase fellow learner and not just say it the first day of class. That's what I learned.
That's awesome.
What did you learn?
I want to just, I agree. I think as we think of ourselves as designers of learning experiences, you are a designer, you're an you're an innovation design coach, right? And as we design and we ask for feedback and we ask the young people in our care, how could we help support you better and gather that, we use design thinking to get better and better. And thinking about the working memory versus the episodic memory, that's a different piece. When we ask them to tell stories about what they've discovered, it shifts things into a different part of their memory that is more sticky and lasts longer. I learned that there are just great people in the world that might just, connect on LinkedIn that have so many interesting experiences. I would love to join you and help you in some way in terms of shifting whatever, or,
I have a great idea. This coming semester, I'm teaching a design thinking course. And we're going to try to find something relevant on the campus. I wonder if you would like to come talk to my class just about your experience. Two things, right? You could back up that what I'm talking about when it comes to design thinking and user-centered design, right? It's not just me saying it, it's hearing it from somebody else as well. But then also potential to actually inspire them or provide awareness to the students of other opportunities for people who have this design mind for career paths that they may wander down. And hopefully not stumble upon because we're shoving it in their face. Right? You don't have to stumble. It's on a platter for you. So that would be awesome, Linda. If you were willing to do that, I would super love to continue the conversation, because you are somebody who is making it happen. Name of the podcast: Make It Happen in the educational space for our learners to make things happen themselves. And you just epitomize all of the everything that we're trying to make happen over here. And I'm glad that you're in the state of Ohio making this happen. You are in Ohio, right?
Thank you. I'm in Ohio, Central Ohio, near Columbus.
There we go. We're all in it together here. The heart of the heartland, we call it.
Yeah.
As educators, fellow learners, the more we can share. Like I said, I've learned, that little spiel about what I learned was all about me, but I've learned a whole bunch of things that I need to dig into from talking to you. So Linda Amici. I don't know. I love saying it that way. It's just like Vince Grossi. But phenomenal conversation, Linda. I do appreciate this so much. And I look forward to continued conversations, because what you're doing is phenomenal, fantastic work that more people need to be aware of. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you
And,
for saying that. We don't always get to see,
it's
the
true.
outcome of what we're doing. We just show up every day the best we can. And then,
For every letter and for every thank you, handwritten thank you that you get from a teacher or a student, there's probably at least 100 that you're not getting. So just multiply that, because that's more of the reality.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm excited about innovation and design class. That will be fun to be participating to, at least be seeing how you're doing things. Well,
I've got other nefarious ideas as well for some things I've got for helping teachers in a whole bunch of different environments, but we'll save that for the next time.
Yeah. I'd love to hear it. I want to hear more about you too. I'm sorry. I feel like I just answered questions, but I didn't ask all the questions I had. So let's try to
it's all good. Everybody knows too much about me anyway. I love Legos. That's about all you need to know. So awesome. Linda, thank you. Thank you. And we'll keep making it happen.
Sounds good. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you. Bye.